Security breach. The Secret Service tightens its grip after an armed veteran gets into the White House. ISIS advances. Tens of thousands of Syrians flee from Islamic State terrorists into neighboring Turkey. Encouraging rebirth. Pope Francis holds up once atheist Albania as an example of religious harmony. And Chicago's new shepherd. We meet the bishop who will succeed Cardinal Francis George. Those stories and more ahead on EWTN News Nightly for this first day of autumn, September 22nd, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. More details are emerging about the Army veteran who jumped the fence and got into the White House Friday night. Suzanne LaFrankie is at the White House tonight with the very latest. Suzanne?
Well, Brian, late this afternoon, federal prosecutors revealed a very disturbing picture of Omar Gonzalez. They say they found 800 rounds of ammo, 2 hatchets and a machete in his car parked just 2 blocks from the White House. Perhaps more disturbing, however, is that the Virginia State Police say they arrested Gonzalez back in July. They had a high-speed chase and they found lots of guns in his car and a map with a circle around the White House. A significant increase in uniformed armed security and additional perimeter barricades were already in place as the Secret Service continues with its investigation. The question? How did officers allow an ex-soldier with a small knife to scale the fence, sprint 70 yards across the White House lawn, and enter the mansion before being apprehended?
I'm surprised just with the, with the security that is on board, and you can, sort of see the odd guy around, and I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. Hard to believe.
I really worry about the security of our nation. We have officers all the way around it. I don't understand how it happened.
The breach led to a rare evacuation of much of the White House. The president and his family were headed to Camp David when the incident occurred Friday evening. This afternoon, White House spokesman Josh Earnest said the Secret Service investigation will include a review of protective efforts both inside the White House grounds and outside the fence line along Pennsylvania Avenue.
The Secret Service has the challenging task of balancing the need to ensure the safety and security of the first family while also ensuring that the White House continues to be the people's house.
Omar Gonzalez, a 42-year-old Army veteran from Central Texas, faces charges of entering a restricted building or grounds while carrying a deadly or dangerous weapon. The Army says Gonzalez served several tours of duty in Iraq and retired due to a disability. Less than 24 hours after his arrest, a second man was taken into custody after he drove up to a White House gate and refused to leave. Although White House officials said the president was obviously concerned about the breach, this afternoon he expressed complete confidence in the Secret Service.
Secret Service does a great job. Thank you. And I'm grateful for all the sacrifices they make on my behalf and my family's behalf.
So many questions do remain tonight, Brian, and also we are being told that Gonzalez is remaining in federal custody. His family says he served in the military for 18 years, 3 tours in Iraq. They also say he suffers from post-traumatic stress syndrome. From the White House, I'm Suzanne LaFrankie reporting for EWTN News Nightly.
And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Pennsylvania's governor says he is confident the survivalist charged in a deadly ambush at a state police barracks will be caught.
We believe there is, I always believe there's progress. Troopers are out there very actively. The FBI is out there very actively. And I feel confident that we should be able to apprehend this individual. And I'm very positive about that.
31-year-old Eric Freen is charged with killing a trooper and seriously wounding another 10 days ago. Investigators think the suspect may have been planning this confrontation for months, possibly years. They believe he may be hiding in bunkers that are built in a dense, rugged northeastern Pennsylvania forest. Afghanistan has a new president, ending months of uncertainty about who will lead that country. Ashraf Ghani Ahmadzai is the new president. A president-elect after agreeing to share power with his rival, Abdullah. He'll serve under the president as a sort of prime minister. The deal was brokered after a drawn-out contested vote count produced no clear winner. Ghani Ahmadzai spoke today calling for more women in government, including the Afghan Supreme Court. The new government will likely be sworn in by the end of the month. Hong Kong students have begun a 5-day class boycott in the name of democracy. They're angry that leaders in mainland China are not allowing direct elections for that city's top official. The Beijing government wants candidates for the post vetted by a special committee before a public vote. Hong Kong has enjoyed greater political freedom than the communist mainland ever since it was returned to China after years of British rule. Crews battling a huge Northern California wildfire are now bracing for hotter temperatures and erratic winds after a cooler weekend. The blaze east of Sacramento has burned through 137 square miles. More than 5,000 firefighters managed to increase containment of the fire over the weekend. It's now 18% contained. That fire has destroyed 10 homes. It's threatening thousands of others. About 2,700 people have been forced from their homes. 37-year-old Wayne Huntsman has been charged with starting the fire. On Friday, he pleaded not guilty to arson charges. Protesters marched in New York's financial district today, opposing corporate environmental behavior. The activists say the institutions are corporate polluters, relying too heavily on fossil fuels. Their effort to symbolically flood Lower Manhattan reflects the fact that that area was partially underwater after Superstorm Sandy in 2012. The protest comes one day before the United Nations Summit on Climate Control in New York. Organizers say another climate march on Sunday drew more than 100,000 people. Pope Francis is calling on moderate Muslims and all religious leaders to condemn Islamic extremists. He says they pervert religion to justify violence. Visiting Albania Sunday, the Pope held it up as a model for interfaith harmony. He called for an end to violence and persecution in the name of God.
Let no one think you can use the shield of God while planning and committing acts of violence and oppression. Let no one take religion as a pretext for their actions that contradict human dignity and fundamental human rights, primarily the right to life and religious freedom of all.
Security was unusually tight for the Pope's first trip to a majority Muslim country. Before his trip, there were reports that Islamic State terrorists who trained in Iraq and Syria had returned and might pose a threat. The capital's main boulevard martyrs of the nation was decorated with giant portraits of 40 Catholic priests who were persecuted or executed under Stalinist dictatorship. Francis paid tribute to the martyrs' witness to their faith, even under persecution.
Pax Vobis.
He also led a mass in Mother Teresa Square in the country's capital. The Vatican said the Pope intentionally selected Albania as a country on the margins with a past of social and religious persecution as well as continuing poverty. He encouraged Albanians, free for only 25 years now, to continue on a path of rebirth. And it's the Holy Father's first major appointment for the U.S. Bishop Blase Cupich will succeed Cardinal Francis George as ordinary for the Archdiocese of Chicago. Bishop Cupich says the call took him by surprise.
Archbishop Vigano called me and began the conversation by saying, I have great news for you. And he sounded like the angel Gabriel, and so the line that came to me was, how can this be?
Cupich is currently the Bishop of Spokane, Washington. He will be installed as the Archbishop of Chicago November 18th. Cardinal George is 2 years past retirement age and suffering from cancer. The appointment is important for several reasons. The Archdiocese of Chicago is the third largest in the U.S., home to more than 2.2 million Catholics. Chicago archbishops are usually elevated to cardinal, becoming eligible to vote for the next pope. And the Chicago Archdiocese boasts one of the largest private school systems in the nation. Dr. Chad Pecknold is Associate Professor of Theology at the Catholic University of America. What does this appointment say about the direction that Pope Francis wants to take the church?
I think it's a perfect Francis effect appointment. This is his most important appointment, I'm sure, in the U.S. Church. It says that he wants someone who is attentive to those at the margins, as we saw in the lead-in. It says that he wants someone who's going to be honest and open and direct on questions of protecting children, for example. Bishop Cupich was one of the great voices championing the protection of young children.
So you know a little bit about him.
Yeah.
Just give us a snapshot.
Well, he did his doctorate at Catholic University. We're very proud of our alumnus at CUA. He recently gave a talk at Catholic U on libertarianism and the church's teaching on economic justice, in which he talked about growing economic inequality as a powder keg, which was ready to go off. It's pretty strong words.
Absolutely. So some media outlets have already labeled him a moderate. Let's hear what he had to say about that.
Yeah.
It's not my agenda. It's not what I feel. I'm going to try to be attentive to what the Lord wants. Maybe if there's moderation in that, then I'm a moderate.
That sounds like something Pope Francis might say.
And it sounds like something that Pope Benedict would have said,
yes,
too. That there's a sense in which everyone expects bishops to conform to some sort of political referendum on partisan politics, and they just don't.
Yeah, they don't fit that mold, do they?
They don't fit it at all.
So 44% of his parishioners in Chicago are Latino. In fact, he spoke in Spanish at his news conference. Does that mean that the church really is beginning to focus more on this growing population of Hispanics that are, traditionally Catholic?
Yeah. I think it is an interesting sociological phenomena that the church in America has constantly dealt with new immigrant populations and has brought a kind of new life from the Irish, from the Polish, now from Hispanic communities, constantly bringing new life, bringing Christ himself into the church in new and exciting ways through these people. I think Bishop Cupich will need to brush up his Spanish, though.
Yeah, kind of like Pope Francis and his English.
Yeah, maybe.
But it's, you mentioned that the Irish and the Polish, there are plenty of those in Chicago, too, by the way.
They are, yeah.
Let's go back to Pope Francis for a second, his visit to Albania this weekend. Why did he choose Albania?
Yeah, Albania, I think it's important. Many of the newscasts have focused on the threat of ISIS and on the security threat on Muslim-Christian relations, and those things are very important to his trip. The real center of his trip is ecclesial, that he's going to Albania. He went to Albania in order to advance the cause of the sainthood of the martyrs who suffered under atheist, communist Albania, and to honor Mother Teresa. These are the ecclesial centers of his mission, and out of that one moves to the margins, and that's where the interest in dialogue and in Muslim-Christian relations comes from.
Great insight.
From the center out.
Dr. Chad Pecknold, the Catholic University of America here in D.C. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Coming up, as the UN General Assembly convenes, Islamic State terrorists call on Muslims worldwide to join the fight. And with new steps coming together in the NFL to tackle domestic violence, an expert highlights help for abused women. Fall begins today on this Monday, the 22nd of September. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. President Obama and other world leaders are in New York this week for the UN General Assembly. The U.S. will lead an effort to rally the international community against the terrorist group ISIS. Wyatt Goolsby is joining us now with that story.
Brian, this push to get support from world leaders this week comes in many ways a way to build on goals the president achieved with NATO leaders a few weeks ago in the UK. Now the coalition against ISIS could grow larger, and the U.S. wants some of that to come from the UN Security Council.
The international community is at war with ISIL, and the United States is at war with ISIL in the same way that we're at war with al-Qaeda and its affiliates around the globe.
Obama officials are calling the threat from militants unprecedented. Roughly 15,000 foreign fighters have joined ISIS ranks in Iraq and Syria. It's why U.S. and European allies are expected to present a resolution that would require nations to bar their citizens from traveling abroad to join terrorist organizations. Meanwhile, Kurdish troops in northern Iraq say they are now receiving weapons and training from U.S. and European allies aimed at fighting the militants. The advance of ISIS in northern Syria is forcing tens of thousands of people to flee into neighboring Turkey. Turkey says more than 130,000 refugees have arrived since Friday, creating a humanitarian crisis throughout the region.
We want to go home, says 20-year-old Layla. We want to go back and be protected. Life here is very difficult. We don't want to stay.
This is yet another illustration of one, just how awful and what an affront to our concept of civilization and humanity ISIS is. And secondly, how we shouldn't count them out.
Former U.S. Ambassador James Jeffrey tells EWTN News Nightly he's optimistic the U.S. can get more countries to join or solidify their support to the coalition. This weekend, Turkey secured the release of 49 hostages held by ISIS, freeing up their ability to step up the fight.
The Turks are a bit ambivalent because they very much want to see the Assad government brought down, and that means supporting many of the resistance groups. But I think the Turks have seen the light on ISIS.
President Obama is expected to lead the UN Security Council session that begins Wednesday, just the second time a U.S. president has done so. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt. Commissioner Roger Goodell is working with outside domestic abuse professionals to review personal conduct in the NFL. He's also promising financial and operational support to groups that work with the abused.
We have entered into long-term partnership with two leading national organizations, the National Domestic Violence Hotline and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. The hotline received an 84% increase in their call volume just last week. They did not have the resources to reach even half of those calls. They need our help, and we are providing it.
Goodell at a news conference on Friday saying he wants to implement new personal conduct policies for the league by Super Bowl Sunday. We're joined by Abraham Ahern, who coordinates domestic violence crisis services in Washington, D.C. The group is called D.C. Safe, Survivors and Advocates for Empowerment. The Ray Rice media storm has really resulted in calls, as he said, 84% increase. Why is that?
Well, I think as horrific as it is to witness any situation of domestic violence, what's powerful about a situation like this is that there is such a focus on what has happened in one case that can really speak to victims and let them know that regardless of the fact that we routinely tell victims that domestic violence is a family matter and that has been a cultural force for a long time, that in fact they are not alone and that abusers cannot act with impunity and that offenders will be held accountable.
The NFL has faced a lot of criticism, partly because they interviewed the victim sitting right next to the alleged abuser. How do you encourage these victims to speak more freely? I'm sure that that's not a great example.
Well, when we meet with victims at Survivors and Advocates for Empowerment, we need to consider the fact that a lot of victims don't feel prepared to share every detail right away. And because they face rational fears, everything from intimidation to social stigma that has attached itself to not trusting that things will be kept confidential. So when we meet with a victim, we try to first ensure that they are in a safe place to speak. We'll interview them alone. We will ensure that they have a safety plan to get safe. We'll ensure that they know that everything that they share with us is in fact confidential. And then, of course, we'll make sure that they have a plan for the next step. If they would like to leave a situation of domestic violence, we want to make sure that they have a place to leave to.
This is often a repeated pattern, and I'm sure when an organization such as the NFL takes it lightly or doesn't address it, doesn't that just add to that? And how has that broken that pattern?
Well, domestic violence is not a crime of passion, as we know. This is something where abusers are exercising power and control. In addition to the physical violence, there is a long-term pattern of them emotionally, physically, economically, and socially isolating the individuals that they abuse. And so when we talk about the fact that it may take a victim 8 times or more to leave a situation of domestic violence, it's because they are facing rational choices as to how to get themselves safe. And so when a high-profile situation like this happens and people see that it hasn't been taken seriously, it can sometimes empower abusers. But on the other hand, when you actually have a holistic response in a community that doesn't just tell a victim what that victim should do, but says that, no, we will hold offenders accountable and we will make sure that folks have the housing that they need, the food that they need, the child care that they need. They shouldn't, a survivor should not have to choose between being safe from an abuser and being unemployed or being homeless or being hungry.
They need a lot of help. Abraham Ahern with DC Safe, Survivors and Advocates for Empowerment. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Up next, we focus on the sanctity of marriage as a new Vatican Commission looks at streamlining the annulment process. And 1 year ahead of the start of the World Meeting of Families, the coordinating bishop has a preview. On Monday evening, September 22nd, this is EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. The Vatican has announced a reform commission to balance the sanctity of marriage and annulment procedures when necessary. Pope Francis actually decided to create the commission last month, but details only emerged over the weekend. The announcement comes ahead of next month's meeting of bishops to discuss family issues. Church teaching forbids divorce. A marriage can be annulled, though, if a tribunal finds that it wasn't originally a valid sacrament. The U.S. poverty rate has dropped for the first time since 2006, and the number of children in poverty is down for the first time in 14 years. The Census Bureau released the findings in its annual look at poverty last week. The news isn't all positive, though. Family poverty is nearly 5 times higher in homes with single female-headed households compared with homes of married couples. Rachel Sheffield is with us, a policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, focusing on welfare, marriage, and family. Single-family homes haven't fared so well in this poverty picture. What is the correlation between marriage and poverty, according to your research?
Well, it's a large one. As you stated, children in single-parent homes are more than 5 times as likely to be poor. And the thing is, marriage keeps parents, particularly fathers, connected to their children. And when you have both parents connected to their children, there's more resources and children are more likely to thrive.
Would you say poverty causes broken marriages, or is it the other way around?
Well, it's a two-way street, really. And unfortunately, in discussions of poverty, however, marriage oftentimes gets left out of the discussion. And that's unfortunate, considering the large role that it does play, and that that marriage is one of the greatest protectors against poverty.
So as your research progressed, what are some of the ways that you found that this cycle might be broken? What can be suggested?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question. And when we look at poverty, the greatest protectors against that are marriage as well as work. And if we look at the example, for example, of the 1996 welfare reform, which inserted work requirements into the largest cash assistance welfare program, we saw more people moving towards work over welfare. And so that's one model of success that we've seen, at least in the policy world, when it comes to fighting poverty and promoting self-sufficiency.
It was 50 years ago that President Johnson launched the war on poverty. Are we winning or losing?
Unfortunately, we haven't done very well. We've spent $22 trillion since the 1960s, which is more than the United States has spent on all of its military wars combined. And yet poverty rates have hardly changed. But that doesn't mean that all that spending hasn't propped up living standards, but it hasn't improved self-sufficiency. And that's really a tragedy.
You would think that money would solve poverty, but apparently it doesn't necessarily.
That's been the approach of the government, to try and spend our way out of poverty. But unfortunately, while we've thrown trillions of dollars at the symptoms, we've failed to address the causes.
So that's really what needs to happen, is address those root causes. With the Heritage Foundation, Rachel Sheffield, thanks for joining us, and we appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
Well, we're exactly 1 year away now from the start of the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. Though it's still not official, Pope Francis is indeed expected to attend. Philadelphia Auxiliary Bishop John McIntyre is helping to plan the meeting, and he gave us an update earlier today.
Different events are going on within the Archdiocesan Pastoral Center, but mostly out in the community to keep people aware of the event itself and how important it is in terms of the life, the vocation of marriage and family.
The World Meeting of Families starts on September 22nd, 2015. EWTN is sending out informational packets to every parish in the country about this. And of course, we will continue to report on the extensive planning for this historic event as the year progresses. Thank you for joining us tonight on this first day of autumn. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching tonight. Good night, and may God bless you.